welcome to ThaiLawForum. Today I'm joined by Andrew Henderson, also known as the Nomad Capitalist. Andrew has spent the last few years travelling the world, learning as much as he can about offshore and investment strategies. Firstly, Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me.
Always my pleasure to be with you.
So if I may, I was going to start by quoting something from your website. You write, "My mission is simple, find the best places to live, start a business and invest." So could you start by explaining a bit about how this became your mission and now your business?
Well, it's funny. When we study history, we always look at the empires that ended in ashes, and we look and we figure that that's some kind of remote occurrence. It never happens where we live. I grew up in a place that I think right now is going through a transformation where it's no longer the most important place on earth. It never was really, but I mean, certainly is becoming less and less important on the global stage. That's the United States. And when I was a kid, parents said, "Hey, you know what? There are other places you should look into." We talk about Hong Kong, we talk about Singapore, we talk about all the places back in the 90s that were on the way up, and those places are now some very, very successful places. They're great places to do business. People are making fortunes there, and people who have fortunes are going there. So it was always kind of my personal philosophy and my family's.
Okay. Now, I love a catchphrase, so one thing that's really struck me about a lot of the things you have been putting out there is your 5 magic words. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, those are the words that kind of defined this philosophy from me being 12 years old and looking at these countries, and it's quite simply, go where you're treated best. The idea, I think, has evolved in many people's minds from, back in the day of, hey, let's leave the old country, let's go to this new land of opportunity, whether that's leaving Europe to go to the United States, leaving now, Latin America, going to the United States, leaving whatever country and going to somewhere else, is we're going to move our life. In the 21st century, really the idea of those 5 magic words is that those places can all be kind of flags on a map, that everything is so digital now that you don't have to pack up from the old country and go to the new country. In fact, you can go where you're treated best without going anywhere. There are people who have moved all of their bank accounts, all of their investments, all of their savings outside of the country they live in, but they keep living there because they like it. And for some people that works. The reality is U.S. real estate, where I'm from, is, it pales in comparison to the real estate in other places that I go to. So why not go where you're treated best? If the banking where you are isn't the best, why not go where you're treated best? And in today's world, it doesn't have to be one place.
Sure. Okay, so when people seek your services, how can you help them? What's the process you take them through?
Well, there's 3 main areas that we help people in. The first area is getting the business optimized. I work with a lot of investors or entrepreneurs as well, people who've sold a business. So people who are either in business or have been in business, we need to optimize that. If it's an active business, where is it trading out of? Is it in a high-tax country, a low-tax country, and a zero-tax country? How do we optimize that for tax, for asset protection, for all sorts of different things? Just, getting the greatest tax deductions, making it easiest for clients to deal with this. If you're in China, maybe there's a better place in the U.S. to have your company. Optimizing the business for all those factors. The second thing is residency and citizenship planning. That is, where do you live? Where are you a resident of? Everyone except Americans has the ability to go and plant their residency flag and say, hey, I really live in Panama, and therefore I don't have to be taxed on this income or that income. The idea is, where do you live? Where are you taxed? And then where is your passport? And so people, I think, increasingly are looking for a second passport to give themselves a great insurance policy. And so we help people plan where they live and where they become a citizen of. And the last step is investing. Where are you investing? Now, if you're stuck in 0.05% certificates of deposit, if you're stuck in low-yield real estate, if you're stuck in bonds, or if you're stuck in the overinflated stock market, you're probably not doing very well, and you're probably heading for a correction. So where do we invest your money to where my most conservative friends tell me they're making 15, 16, 17% a year, and where there are other opportunities? Those are the 3 main things that we focus on in that order.
Okay, well, I'd like to touch briefly upon FATCA.
Sure.
How do you think this has changed things in the last few years for people?
Well, I think that FATCA really emphasizes why those 3 steps I just laid out are so important together. And a lot of people, they go out there and say, I want a second passport. What's the fastest, easiest, and cheapest way to do it? And they end up getting into trouble because, A, they're violating some law somewhere, because there are a lot of guys out there doing things the wrong way. But they're not doing things in the bigger picture. You know, right now, U.S. citizens are at a very big disadvantage when it comes to banking, doing business, starting businesses, getting investment overseas. I know guys who run companies in places like Switzerland. They're an American. Their partners are not. Their partners are trying to get rid of them because they can't even function in their own country where they're doing business. I know people who are Americans in the Middle East who can't take on Middle Eastern clients. I've had this problem to a lesser extent, but I know guys who are losing millions of dollars because of FATCA. I know bankers. I interviewed one recently on one of my shows. He was a great friend of mine, runs a private bank in Abu Dhabi. He says the U.S. sends $1,000 an hour lawyers to our bank to tell us about anti-money laundering. We don't have a single U.S. client. So FATCA is making banking difficult for everybody. I think that is going to make a new round of safe havens. I'm big on the country of Georgia, for example, where things are a bit easier. But for Americans, I mean, it really shows why you need to optimize your business in a way that you have a great company, but also the bank accounts to go with it. You get that second passport so that as things get worse, you'll have a plan B in terms of citizenship. And you're investing your money in a way that's FATCA compliant. It's really having a big effect. Americans are getting screwed. They need a plan B. And everyone else, I think, needs to be kind of on guard as well.
Okay, if I may ask, what's your situation? Have you got a second passport?
Well, so I don't talk about the passports that I have, obviously. I am a U.S. citizen. I'm making some decisions about what I'm going to be doing with that. But, obviously, I'm a guy who geeks out on this stuff. I go and I open bank accounts in places just to see the process. I get residencies in places. And I think that there's also some times where I and other people have residencies that may qualify for citizenships where it may not be strategic to get the citizenship. So, that's one thing. I'm one of the most transparent guys probably in this business. For obvious reasons, there's certain things I like to, I like to keep the documents in the drawer and kind of use that as the trump card in the future. But, what I'll tell you is I'm always working towards something new. I'm always figuring out what's the next one to get.
What do you think about, I've read a lot about, increasing numbers of people now renouncing their US citizenship. Do you think that this is prudent or perhaps something we should be worried about?
Look, I'm a guy who has a lot of philosophical differences with the United States. I don't agree with the things the government's doing. I think the tax policy is obviously the most draconian in the world. I understand the more pragmatic I get. I think when you're an entrepreneur, you have to be really pragmatic. The idea that it's hard to leave a country. It's a big decision these people are making. I think they don't need to be chastised. They don't need to be beat up as political piñatas by politicians who want to score points with the working class. I think it is a good decision for a lot of people. I think it's also not a good decision. I hear from people, Andrew, I have no money, I have no business, I have nothing going on, I want to renounce my citizenship. Like, for what? Maybe you just need to leave the country. Maybe if you're concerned about the police and whatever, you don't like it, just leave the country. So I think that it's situation specific. I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs who are kind of at that $1 million mark. They're coming up on the $2 million mark where they're going to have to, if they want to renounce in the future, go through a lot of nonsense. If they're content living overseas, they don't want to go back to the U.S., I think it makes sense. The biggest reason I tell people not to do it is I said, unless you have a European passport from living there for a long time, or your grandparents were Italian or something, or you're going to spend $1 million buying an EU passport, chances are you're going to have another document that's not going to let you visit the United States. There's only, I think, 38, 39 countries that can go visa-free to the U.S., and even that can be challenging sometimes. So unless you've got some great passport, you have to be comfortable with not going back to the United States, because I think that, there are times when the government, makes a political point by saying, hey, you renounced, we don't want you to come back in, we're not going to give you a visa.
Yes, I think that's what the worry is. I think maybe too many people are rushing into it, or so I've heard, but I don't really know.
I think that the trajectory, Pippa, coming in the next 10 years is, are you a citizen of a high-tax country or a low-tax country? For so long, people have talked about zero tax, go to the Cayman Islands, go to Nevis, just pay nothing, report nothing, no audits, no work, just everything's just so laid back. And, you've got countries like Hong Kong joining the OECD. You've got other countries, Chile is now kind of in this new, they're a U.S. visa waiver country, and they're kind of changing to be more socialist. Countries, if you want to play in the leagues with traveling to and doing business in these big countries, you're going to have to pay a little tax in the future. I think that the debate right now is not how to get to zero tax in the wild, wild west, but how to pay as little tax as possible, have lower regulations but not no regulations, and how to use that to get a citizenship in a decent country. Because if you're a citizen of, Vanuatu, I think that, if you're a zero tax guy bouncing around the world as a perpetual traveler from Vanuatu, you're going to run into some trouble in the next 5 to 10 years. It's about
where Vanuatu is. Where is it?
Well, that's the problem. Most people don't.
You mentioned Georgia earlier, I know, but are there any other places? Do you have perhaps a top 5 or top 3 countries that you think these are great havens at the moment?
Again, I think that, what you have to look at is the idea that it doesn't have to be a great haven in every respect. People used to think, the United States, it's the answer to all of our problems. And then they went there and it was like, it's just like any other place. The streets aren't paved with gold, right? I'm a fan of Georgia for a lot of things. I'm a fan of the culture. The banks are good. Are they the best? No, but they're easy, they're friendly, it's efficient, and I rely on them. Starting a company there, not the lowest tax, but there's some other benefits you can get. You can get residence. The passport there is not the best passport. I think it will get better. I think that country could be the new America, not in a way that the United States was, because I think there'll be a lot of new Americas, but I think it could be one of the big ones. Colombia for investments, Malaysia for living. There's a lot of countries, Estonia for doing business. There's just a lot of countries that are really vying right now. It's very situation specific. So I look at culture. Georgia right now is one of my favorite cultures in the whole world. But I also think that Europe is making a resurgence in general. It's hard to pick out one country that applies to everyone. But the reality is there are some countries in Europe that are quasi-tax havens for certain types of people, if you know how to play it. This idea that Americans have that Europe is just this socialist basket case. The reality is Europe treats people a lot better in certain circumstances.
Well, I've been having a look at your website. One other thing that you write on your website is that, and I can read it, I've done the hard work and made some of the mistakes so you don't have to. Can you highlight a specific mistake, something that maybe was unexpected that might help anyone watching?
Yeah, one of the things that I've really practiced in my latter years as an entrepreneur is the law of abundance and making things easy and not clinging to every penny. And that's part of why I've made this transition from just writing and writing books to actually helping people do this. And we've set a goal of helping people plant 5,000 flags by the end of 2020. And, one mistake that I've made in trying to be a little bit too abundant is, was in Latin America, was in Nicaragua, was going through a legal process there, and just told the lawyer, how much is it? Oh, it's like nothing. It's like hundreds of dollars. I said, just here's the money. He said, well, no, it's half up front, it's half later, right? Just here's the money. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to think about sending it $500 later. Just here it is. And it was really, really, really slow. And eventually I just kind of abandoned ship, because I didn't really understand early on that in certain cultures, it's, hey, they need that kind of that carrot and the stick to get things done. If you pay them in advance, it's kind of like you're at the back of the line. Fortunately, I haven't had $100,000 ripped off from me in a real estate deal. Like a guy I know, my friend Neil Strauss, who wrote the book Emergency, got a passport in St. Kitts and Nevis. He came out fine, but he found out later his lawyer, was like embezzling 6-figure sums from people. And I think that, what he said really rings true to me. You got to have an expert. Just going down to Nicaragua and knocking on doors and finding a lawyer to do some stuff for you and like, all right, this guy seems fine. It didn't cost me very much. I learned a great lesson, and I probably could have stuck it out and just dealt with it. But I think the lesson there is, work with someone who speaks your language at least.
Okay, well, I'll wrap up, but maybe one last question. Is there one thing, one little sort of nugget of awesomeness that you can offer anyone watching? What's the one thing they should be thinking about?
Well, it sounds a bit, Tony Robbins-esque, but there's a point to it, and that is take the first step. If you haven't taken a step, go out and take the first step. People ask me, how do I start traveling? How do I live your lifestyle? What I did was I set aside 6 months. I said, I'm going to be gone for 6 months. And you know what? That gave me the out to always come back and resume life. And hey, I spent my 6 months. But I knew it would actually be the push that I needed to keep going and keep diversifying. And along the way, I planted many of my own flags. The other reason I say that is because people often come to me and they have 92 different problems. I host a conference every year called Passport to Freedom. Peter Schiff has been there, Jim Rickards, some big names. And we always get on stage the first day and tell people, relax. If you don't have a business, you probably don't need an offshore company. People say, I need an offshore company. Well, for what? I don't know, I just need one. Relax a little bit, take the first step, figure out what that best first step is for you, and once you take the first step, then you'll see the next step. It's kind of like go as far as you can and then see further, rather than trying to tackle everything at once.
Okay, very inspirational. All right, Andrew, thank you so much.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.